morning. Since I just bought a new bike that's 20 years old, I thought I'd go over a couple things to look at when you're looking at a new bike to buy, or especially a used bike to buy. So let's get into it. I guess we'll start up top. You want to check your clutch. There is no free play in this clutch. This clutch is way over adjusted, but the clutch pull is smooth. I can feel the spring working. There's nothing binding or sticking, so that's good. I can adjust the clutch later. Check your throttle free play. On this one, it's just about right. That's actually how much throttle free play you should have. And this one's got a cable style throttle, but this applies to either one. You want a nice smooth throttle action with a nice clean snap closed. Should be smooth. There should be no binding. It shouldn't stick and fight. It shouldn't stick open. It should snap shut nice and clean. So that's just how you want it to be. It's good right there. Check your brake feel. Got a lot of throw on that brake lever. And it does pump up a little bit, so I know I'm going to want to bleed the brake and replace the fluid. Want to check your handlebars. If your handlebars are loose, your riser bushings tend to wear out on these old Harleys, and the handlebars will be floppy. So you want to check those. If they're floppy, usually you can just tighten the bolt, but sometimes you need new riser bushings. You also want to make sure they don't roll forward and back in the bar clamps, like the bar clamps are loose. When you're buying a used bike, and this should be fairly obvious, but we'll go through it anyway, you want to check all your lights. So, my headlights and spotlights work, my running lights are on. And my tail light's on. Let's check the brakes. Brake lights work with the front brake. Brake lights work with the rear brake. Right turn. Right turn. Left turn. And left turn. So, all my lights work. Horn works. Now let's make sure the high beams work. High beam comes on and the passing lamps go out. So that's working the way it should. Let's turn that off. And the switch for the passing lamps is working. So all my lights and horn work. Moving on, you want to check your brake pads. I don't know how well you can see, but there's plenty of thickness on the wear material on the pad. Maybe we can see the other side through here. There's plenty there. Plenty on this one, plenty on the inboard pad on the other side. You want to look at your brake rotors too. And if they're all rough and grooved up, or if they have black spots on them, you're going to need brake rotors. Brake rotors on a bike are very expensive. It's not like the $30 or $40 rotors on a car. These are a couple $100 each. You also want to check your tires. See what kind of shape the tires are in. You might be in for putting a set of tires on. And another thing to check for tires is the manufacture date, which is right there at the end of the DOT number. There's always a manufacture date. That says 2818. That means that tire was manufactured the 28th week of 2018. Shelf life on tires is 5 years. You can theoretically run them for about 7 years, but no one's allowed to sell you a tire that is over 5 years old, because that's how long they can sit on a shelf and still be good. So even though a tire looks brand new, it can be pretty old and still look brand new, and it might be bad for being too old. Because when they get old, they get hard and they crack and bad things happen. You'll want to look for leaky fork seals. And on the Harleys, they tend to have these covers on the forks, especially on the touring models, so you can't see where the upper fork tube goes into the lower leg. But if you rub your fingers on the back and down here, if there's a leak, you'll find oil. And this one doesn't have any leaks, but it's not uncommon for bikes this old to have leaky forks, and it's also not uncommon for them to not have leaky forks. And you got to kind of look hard, because when you can't see the actual fork tube because of the cowbells, we call them, people will wipe off and get them as clean as they can to kind of hide that, especially if it's coming from a used dealership like this one did. So be aware of that, because that can be a pretty costly repair as well. If it's fuel injected, you want to make sure that this little guy isn't leaking fuel. And you want to look at your rocker boxes for oil leaks. This one has a pretty good oil leak. I don't know how well it's coming through with the flashlight, but that's leaking oil pretty good. To do that myself doesn't cost much to fix. To have a shop do it, that's a $500 job or more. It's right here on your primary. You want to reach in here and feel the back side of the primary. And if your hand comes out looking like that, that's probably pretty normal. And this is fairly dry. If it's wet and oily, that's another really expensive thing to fix. That's an inner primary seal leaking. It's also a good idea to look at your drive belt if you can. Which is hard to see on camera, but the belt's right here. This one's pretty good. The tension's pretty loose. It should have about 3/8 of an inch, and it's got about 3/4. Because to replace a drive belt on a Harley-Davidson is about an 8-hour job, and the belt's about $200. And yeah, so it's a big, expensive job if that belt's a mess. Oh. And another thing to look at on a Harley-Davidson bagger, Road King, Road Glide, Street Glide, these brackets right here. This bracket that comes down the fender holds your bag rail, and it holds your muffler up, and it holds all kinds of things. And this one is broken. And it's fairly common for those to break right there in that spot, right here at this corner, because of the vibration and everything. So always check that, because that's a $75 bracket and probably $150 labor to have it changed, if not more, depending on the shop you work at. Also a good idea to check this guy and make sure that this shaft that goes through the middle isn't wallowed out. Make sure all your controls are loose, because if it's sloppy in there it'll wear out the levers and it'll wear out the shaft, and all of a sudden you can't shift because there's no splines. It's a good idea to make sure this guy is tight as well, and it is, because you don't want that to break on you on the road either. You want to look for excess oil leakage anywhere. just look for oil under the bike. Look for oil on the bottom of the motor, on the bottom of the primary. I don't know what I'm filming, but so there's a little seepage on this one. It's nothing major. Another good thing to look at is if you got a cable clutch, there's an O-ring here that'll start to leak, and you'll leak transmission oil, and your clutch will be all your clutch cable will be all saturated and covered with oil. So look for that. You want to look for oil all over everything, like I've got here, for oil leaks from your air cleaner, because that might tell you that yeah, there's oil coming out of the air cleaner. So that is more likely to tell you that the oil's over full than that you've got any kind of issue, but there could be a problem with the breather to where the check valves aren't working and it's letting it puke oil out everywhere. On this one, I'm going to reseal the rocker boxes anyway. I've got a whole kit. It replaces all the breather valves and stuff. So that should take care of this, all this oil. But that's another thing to look at. It's probably not a big deal if that is happening. Probably the engine oil was just over full, but it could be an issue with the breathers. You'll want to check the exhaust. Make sure nothing's loose. Like these heat shields rattle a little bit. We can tighten those up. And you want to look for cracks on your Road Kings and electric glides. It's pretty common for this to crack right here and right here, like we saw on my electric glide. You want to check, make sure your pipes aren't going to fall off. This is normal, it's got that bushing there. This one's got this broken strut right here. Just give it a good looking over. While we're back here, we'll check the rear brake. You can see from behind, you can look up under the bag. Don't know how well it's coming through on camera, but I can see the brake pad, and there's not bad wear on it. It's about half, so we're okay there. And like on the front, we want to look for grooves and black spots and hot spots on the brake rotor. And this one is a little grooved up, but it ain't too bad. It does have some hot spots on it, some discoloration from heat, which will cause it to have a brake pedal pulsation in the rear brake pedal. We'll also check our brake feel on our rear brake, and that feels real good. So moving right along, we'll check the charging system. All right, so to check the charging system, you just need a cheap multimeter. You'll do this with the engine running. You want between 13.5 and 14.3 volts. 14.5 volts is okay. 14.8 volts, you're definitely overcharging, and your stator's probably going bad. Not your stator, your voltage regulator is going bad. And overcharging means you're going to burn up other things on the bike. So overcharging is bad. It breaks all kinds of stuff. And what you do is you take your multimeter And if it's got a tender or a tender plug, normally a tender plug will look different. Your tender plugs normally look like this. The side that's exposed on the bike will be the ground, and the other side will be positive. This one has this boot over it, and some do. So my ground is actually the one on the left right there, and the positive is the one on the right. If you do not have a tender plug, you can pop this boot off your starter and put your positive lead to that stud, and your negative lead to whatever ground you can find. Any of the bolts on the engine and transmission will do. And then you start your engine and read your voltage. So I've got my leads hooked up, got my meter here. We're reading 12.6 volts with the bike off, which is very good. So there, 14.5. We're happy. It's not. It kind of varies a little by year. Some don't want to charge that high, but for the most part, 14.5 is good. And if you're charging at like 14.8 or 15, you're definitely overcharging. So that's bad. And under 13.5 is bad. So bring a meter, check that, because replacing a charging system is very expensive also. You're going to want to listen for exhaust leaks and listen to the engine sound and make sure you don't hear any ticks and raps and bangs and rattles and crashes and whines that aren't supposed to be there. But this one isn't making any noises it's not supposed to make, so I'm not going to run it and say, hey, it shouldn't make that noise. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are the things I like to look at. Obviously, you're going to look for anything obvious, anything loose and falling apart that's just like obvious, but those are kind of the big things to check that are a little less obvious.